Okay, so I do plan on doing another show as it pertains to Jaden Ivey. I do think it's important that we address some issues that have plagued him. So let me first start by stating there's not a goddamn thing wrong with Jaden Ivey. All this nonsense about he's having a mental breakdown, he needs mental health evaluation is absurd. It's disrespectful. To think that a young black male cannot be a free thinker in this dispensation of 2026. It is unsettling to constantly hear that when young men like him, and fast forward backwards, respectfully, to the days of Allen Iverson, when AI used to speak out. AI is not an artificial intelligence, but an Allen Iverson. In the 1990s and the millennial period, people started stating that he was crazy, he had mental illness. And then you had a core group of individuals who recognized him as an individualist, as someone who took an opportunity to bring to the awareness of others what it meant to be young, to be black, to be a millennial, to be a product, respectfully, of a baby boomer generation, his mother having given birth to him in 1975. And so we are dealing similarly with the same thing with Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey paid for Detroit Pistons and then was traded to the Chicago Bulls. Chicago Bulls then released him upon him making a statement regarding his position of how the NBA was quote unquote promoting or celebrating Pride Month. For those who are not part of the same sex LGBTQIA community, Pride Month is a celebration of same sex relationships. Some people consider it a celebration of freedom. It depends on what freedom you're talking about. For someone who might fall under Judeo Christianity, as Ivy does, he sees it as a day to celebrate abomination, the celebration of a league representing same sex relationships. This is the very same NBA, by the way, that turned its back on Dwight Howard, even before Dwight Howard's situation arose with regard to him having allegations of being in a same sex relationship. Whether it was temporarily or not, he deemed it as quote unquote a sign of his freakiness. Others deemed it as a sign of bisexuality. That being said, it has always been alluded to throughout the NBA, very silent conversations. The locker room doesn't tolerate open gayness in the NBA. And so, why therefore target Jaden Ivey on his statement about Pride Month? And does he not, as an athlete, have the right to do exactly what Luke Cornett did from the San Antonio Spurs when he spoke out through his blog and verbally, respectfully, as did we, regarding the Atlanta Hawks and the NBA associating its brand with Magic City, adult entertainment. Adult entertainment also lends itself respectfully to same sex relationships, but also more importantly, because there's a lot of lesbianism that happens when girls have been victimized and abused. Most of them find comfort in the arms of each other. But adult entertainment in this space was one that suggested sex trafficking, human trafficking, prostitution, and the like, and that was not a brand, respectfully, for which the NBA wanted to associate itself. So why was it acceptable for him to do that? And we supported him doing that, and we stand with him doing that because we spoke out on the problem of the Atlanta Hawks supporting Magic City nightclub and at Magic City Monday night because it's supposed to be family oriented. So isn't that the same regarding Jaden's stance with what is happening in the NBA? Let's be clear. If a child is raised in a household by same-sex parents, that is relegated to that household. But wherein the NBA is a quote unquote a family oriented. What is family? It's same sex couples family? Yes, it is. But what he was suggesting is the NBA should not be promoting it. The lifestyle itself is an abomination. He is not saying anything any differently than what our Supreme Court of the United States recently ruled in a case where a baker was being forced to make a cake to celebrate the marriage and or partnership of a same-sex couple. And so I say to the NBA, be careful about where you're going with this, Adam Silver, where when black men speak out on issues that are as important as anyone else, there seems to be a pushback by the league to silence their conversation, be it under the auspice of freedom of speech or the freedom to assemble or right to assemble or the freedom of religion, all falling under the First Amendment. Now, there are cases that the NBA needs to take into play when the NBA is thinking about punishing athletes for speech. Okay. And this would be a ripe case if Jaden was to hire counsel, which my understanding is the NBA may very well be facing a class action lawsuit. But let me bring this. You have Mahanoy Area School District versus BL. It was a 2021 case wherein the Supreme Court of the United States spoke in that case, and let me give you two others. There's another case. It's Groff, Groff versus DeJoy. That's Dejoy. And then the last case is Creative versus Elenis, Elenis. These are three Supreme Court and/or Second Circuit district cases. In New York, you're out of the Second Circuit. Wherein the Supreme Court and the federal courts are very conservative, respectfully, on these issues of what employers can and cannot do regarding controlling the speech of its employees. Now, one may argue that players in the NBA are not technically employees, maybe they're independent contractors, but that's not the case. They don't get a 1099, right? Or do they? Or they get in 1040s? Or they get in 1099s. That's a different topic. We'll discuss that later in a different show. But for purposes of understanding this and the professional corporations that many of them now file their taxes under, they would meet the definition of being employees of their local franchises. And so the National Basketball Association, through the lens of a corporate entity that governs and regulates the franchises respectfully, the same way the NBA could step in to make a comment against Kerry Irvin when Kerry Irvin reposted a documentary about Black Hebrews that was distributed by Amazon and punished him for doing so, as did Nike, to the tune of almost $17 million. He simply reposted. He didn't elaborate any further. You all stated that the repost was almost a support of his position that these blacks are Hebrews, and they are, and that is who they are. And so we don't get to play this game, Adam, of picking and choosing who and when the NBA speaks up and punishes respectfully, because that's exactly what's transpiring. Punish African American men who take a stance on what they believe. At some point, the NBA is going to be punished itself for doing that. And this is Trump's Supreme Court. So you no longer have a Supreme Court where the Ruth Bader Ginsburg or a swing vote, respectfully, from a Justice Stevens or a Breyer sits on that court. We have now the most conservative court since 1789 when they first thought about putting together a Supreme Court. Okay? So by far, we definitely have one of the most conservative courts in the history of the United States. I think our first Congress met in 1789. That's the Congress that said, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, respectfully. That's why we deem it the first Congress, right? It was that Congress that said to America, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, well before we had the conversations of the 1961 inauguration speech of Kennedy, okay? It is that Congress of 1789 that tells us to pull ourselves up by the bootstrap that was also deemed a very conservative court, respectfully. Fast forward to where we are today, and by far, we have a court that has repealed affirmative action, has repealed Roe v. Wade. So the liberalism that New York, the liberalism that the NBA and the like have been able to benefit from over the course of the last decades is not going to happen for you all now. Because what you're doing now is you're literally skating on the thinnest ice possible when you allow for an athlete like Jaden Ivey to be waived by the Chicago Bulls. Now, let me pause. Before programming the show, I understood it to be true that the vice president of operations and general manager for the Chicago Bulls is going to be released. I hope they are. They should be. I look forward to that. That being said, I hope they make clear in that message that we're not going to be in the business of punishing athletes for speaking their truths. That is not the direction of the NBA. The NBA has had a history under the former late great Commissioner David J. Stern, right, Shiva, under him. that these individuals were athletes. It was one of the things why when he used to meet and or have discussions regarding Allen Iverson, the former 76ers, who needs no introduction, respectfully, that Allen Iverson, an individual who would speak out about what he believed. And at the time, his conversation was very similar. He did rap music, but he also spoke out about same-sex relationships. He also spoke out with regard to homosexuality. How do we say to Black men that this is not a conversation that they should have? How do we say to them that to speak out against and or for it somehow taints the brand of the NBA? These individuals have the right to be separate from the NBA. Every move they make is not connected and or branded and or associated respectfully to the NBA. So where he's waived with specificity and particularity for making the comment about Pride Month and the NBA celebrating Pride Month, anyone who listened to him understood that he was stating that as a product of the NBA himself, that he did not want to be associated respectfully with a Pride Month brand, that he did not want that to interfere with his belief, his religious beliefs. Fast forward, it's part of the same conversation that he took to social media from a plane flight and made about Stephon Curry. Now, a lot of us are up in arms about Stephon Curry. Some of us have a love relationship for Stephon and the Curry boys, and some of us have a love-hate relationship regarding them, right? But who are we to say that Jaden Ivey cannot speak his truth with regard to whether or not he believes that the Stephon Curry, who's been promoted as this Judeo-Christian, individual who is holy and godly than anything and anybody, that he's not, right? Who is Jaden Ivey to say that? He is the same person who listens to everyone else put Stephon Curry in the super God category based on his Christianity and or Judeo-Christian thoughts and his profess of his love for Jesus Christ. He's that same person. So the core group that supports Stephon, that speaks out in support of his religious beliefs and his faith, we don't say to them, we don't condemn them because they're supporting it. But the minute someone speaks in opposition of it and or presents to us some truths regarding that. So for Jaden's position is based on his faith. He doesn't believe that an individual who's using profanity, that an individual that engages in drinking bourbons and promoting alcoholism, he doesn't believe that that individual should be one who represents himself as a Christian. That's his thought. And he obviously has his very own truth or evidence to substantiate that. Now let's take it a step further. There's some who could go deeper, deeper, deeper than that, who could talk about maybe Stephon Curry entertaining outside of, his home, his trips to the Bahamas. I keep trying to tell you, check these tricks that y'all be rocking with. Right? I think that rhymed. I know it did. Clean up, social media, baby boy, clean up people sending us information, whether old, new. That might be one of the reasons why, the wife is saying that the quote unquote tricks, oh, excuse me, not tricks, the fans, that the fans respectfully, it might be only, but that the fans respectfully, it might be only a group of fans respectfully, but the fans are notorious. Right? That might be why she spoke out. And so maybe when Jaden speaks out, people need to look through the lens in which his own wife has spoke out. I mean, she wouldn't be concerned about fans being notorious unless maybe some fan was able to connect with her husband, right? It is what it is. I speak my truth. He know what he know. Right. So I would have thought that he could have spoke up, and the same way he jumped online regarding Killer Mike's statement, he could have jumped on in defense of Jaden and said, listen, Jaden has, right to have his own opinion about my faith and let's keep it moving. But when you don't do that and you allow people to feel like you somehow a victim in this conversation, what you open yourself up to is people starting to say, well, he was in the Bahamas, but I didn't see Aisha with him. I'm just having a real one with y'all. Right. So we're going to sit here and act like we love Stephon for what he does in the court, but we don't know about this man's personal life, and we shouldn't. And that goes back to Jaden Ivey. What they do in their personal lives is their business. When does the NBA draw a line in terms of how far in the personal lives they're going to interfere? There was a point in time when the league would go as so far as to even try and choose the mates of certain superstar athletes and what they thought was acceptable. But I think now you're going to run into a serious problem. The three cases I cited, the Supreme Court and the Second Circuit, says basically this, that you do not have the right to govern and or to implement policies and or procedures that impede and or interfere with the religious beliefs and or the freedom of speech of your employees unless it is damaging. And so here's the operative word. What evidence of damaging does the NBA have to prove that at the time that Jaden Ivey made the comment that he did not believe that the NBA should associate itself with Pride Month brand? Again, he did no different than Luke Cornett. So when Luke Cornett said the NBA shouldn't associate themselves, the Atlanta Hawks that is, with adult entertainment brand, what is different about the conversation coming from Luke versus the conversation coming from Jaden? Is it that this is a young black male speaking out? Is it that this is a young black male who's saying he's not going to allow his brand that is associated under contract at the time with the Chicago Bulls to be associated with a team and or an entity that is promoting same-sex relationships? That is Pride Month. We could beat around the bush all we want with what Pride Month is and what it's not. We, call them now the LGBTQIA community, the alphabet mafia, because basically all the alphabets are going to be taken. And we say that respectfully, but there's some truism to that, right? And so when we speak our piece with regard to whether or not we're heterosexuals, why can't a heterosexual woman, a heterosexual male, speak his or her truth with regard to their stance on Pride Month, with regard to their truth regarding same-sex relationships? Why are we in the heterosexual community being forced to be silent in this issue? I always make clear I'm a proud heterosexual woman, but I also know people that represent the LGBTQIA community. That's their business, that's their space. But I say this respectfully, I don't allow them to impede on who and what I am, no more than I wish for them to be able to impede on who and what I am, right? And so this is the direction that our Supreme Court is going. It comes down to this: enough is enough already. You don't get to say to a Jaden Ivey that we are going to publicly try to humiliate you by making it look like you have the problem. Jaden Ivey doesn't have a problem. He doesn't suffer from any mental health disorders or defect. In fact, in preparation for Ron Ball, the Allen Iverson way, one of the things that we did for one of the subchapters of both the book and the documentary is we created mental health. And I take out a mental and I highlight the word men, and I take out a health and I highlight the word heal. And it is really for men to heal. So mental health is about men heal. So how do we look for men to heal? We don't look for men to heal by quashing their speech. And that's exactly what has happened to Jaden Ivey. And again, I'm saying to you, Commissioner, there are people who think, oh, she doesn't have a lot of people who listen, but I know who listen to me, like the Rick Buchanan type and the Alden Silver, okay? And I know that you listen to me, and I know that you listen to us, because I know what you did with regard to the stakeholders as it pertains to the issue of the adult entertainment industry, sex and human trafficking, okay? And you need to take the same stance. And I know that you listen, and I know that you troll respectfully, okay? And I'm saying this respectfully: do something about putting Jaden Ivey back in uniform, okay? You all are not going to be out here promoting the Scotty Barnes with white whores that he met this girl who was a trick that he met online. Okay. And now y'all out here talking about this Ray Holmes is his quote unquote partner. You're not going to be able to do that to these black male athletes. Y'all don't get to pick and choose and say it's acceptable for them to run around with white girls they meet online that they're tricking with, that they're having whorism relationships with, and then define these white whorisms as this white whore, as some quote unquote partner. But then you take a Jaden Ivey and you make him look like he's the one with the mental illness, like he's the one with the problem, because he's now saying, hey, I'm not going to promote a brand that's promoting homosexuality and same-sex relationships. He has the right to say it. That's freedom of speech. It's protected by his right to assemble. It's protected by his religious freedoms. There are conservative groups that love the moment that we're in. Trust me when I tell you. They love the moment that we're in. The moment that he is in is a moment that gives him an opportunity, respectfully, to be able to speak his truth. This, respectfully, is what they call Trump's America. With it being Trump's America, it is a conservative court that he has aligned himself with in an effort to change the trajectory of America. People are getting sick and tired of being silenced by our truths. The three cases that I gave you, Supreme Court of the United States and Second Circuit case. If I were you, with Rick Buchanan, who's Vice President General Counsel, you guys, and Vice President General Counsel, you, Rick, and Vice President General Counsel, you guys need to read those cases, all three of them. Okay? And you need to be reminded what those cases are basically entailing and how they will grossly impact the future of the NBA if you're not careful. What you did with Curry Irvin was just the beginning, and you all have continued this. You never even punished Amazon, Jeff Bezos, for the distribution of the video and the documentary, excuse me, for which Curry Irvin is being held and was held to a higher standard for a simple repost. But you did nothing but enter into part of a $76 billion meteor's right deal with Amazon through Prime. Now, what kind of sense does that make? So you're clearly showing disparity in how you deal with certain issues. So it's okay for Jeff Bezos to distribute it to millions of people around the world. I think it's 214 countries that he promoted that to. But at the same time, you enter into a media deal with him. Now, there are others who are part of the $76 billion media package, but nevertheless, you didn't say to him, because you distributed this, Black and Hebrew, that as a result of your distribution, we're not going to do business with you, right? But you say to Kerry Irvin, we're going to punish you if you don't apologize for the repost. And now we're fast forwarding to Jaden. And so as much of this conversation that impacts Jaden or surrounds Jaden's life has a lot to do with his religious belief and religious freedoms, but it's also something else. And I want to end on this note. Jaden is in part like the John Morant, like the Allen Iverson. The difference is he's mostly aligned with the Allen Iverson because AI would speak his truth, and AI didn't give a hoot about who he offended when he spoke. One of the things that Commissioner David Stearns admired about Allen Iverson is that he did speak his truth and how important it was for us to speak up. For you, Commissioner, and I say this during Passover, it is important that you don't respectfully pass over what has happened to Jaden Ivey. It is important that he has the ability to speak and to be heard and to be able to be respected for what he says. We may not agree. There was once upon a time where people simply said, we respectfully agree to disagree. People can do that. But where we're starting to fire or terminate or destroy individuals for what we know the NBA does, and it's a quietness of the locker room anyway. Why didn't Dwight Howard get to stay in the NBA? Yeah, enough said, right? And so Jaden is just simply speaking a truth that we know exists. The glass is half full or it's half emptied. And I would highly suggest, if I were the National Basketball Association and if I were the Chicago Bulls, to find a way to put that young man back in uniform. Thank you for joining me. This is Lisa Hampton. Love is selflessly authentic, having all money, power, talent, opportunities now.